Hi there, I'm Karina Kierkoff, and welcome back to the Frisco ISD podcast. Today I'm happy to chat with Liberty Science teacher Holley Mosley, Liberty senior Aadi Vasa, and Managing Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning, Meridith Manis, for a conversation about grading practices in Frisco ISD. Listen to hear how grading changes in Frisco ISD are a reflection of the district's philosophy of knowing each child by name and need. Through the updated grading system, students and parents are able to better understand each student's strengths and weaknesses. Oh, and stay tuned after our episode to hear about the latest news happening around the district. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to learn how the updated grading practices came to be and how it impacts the classroom. Meridith, let's start with you. As the Managing Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning and 21 years in Frisco ISD, you have experience as a former teacher and district administrator. Tell me about FISD's journey to improving assessment practices over the past few years, and can you give a brief overview of practices that we've been implementing?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. So everything that we do as educators is tied to state and or AP standards. So our instruction and our assessments have always aligned to that. And we just wanted to improve on that so that the grades are a true reflection of what students master on those standards. And we're really focused around student learning. We, in the past, have muddied those waters when we do things like the extra credit or we punish students for behavior by taking points off their grade. Then we don't really have an accurate report of what students know and are able to do. So a few things that we've done this past few years and implemented is not giving the bonus and extra credit. When we assign homework, it's not calculated into the weighted average. We allow retest up to 90%. We use academic contracts with our students so that it's really clear what is assessed and how it will be assessed and what the student responsibilities are. And we are holding students accountable for doing their work through a system of support.
Not giving bonus or extra credit, that's probably a big deal to parents who very much grew up under that system.
Absolutely, we all did. Hey, did you get a Kleenex box? That's an extra 100.
How did we get here?
Well, we knew we had room for improvement around assessment and grading, so we started studying practices as a district. In a district our size, we spent a year just learning together before we decided on any changes. And then we allowed campuses to begin to make small changes when they were ready. It's important to know a change is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So just like training for any marathon, it takes dedication, a desire to improve, a plan, support and celebrations along the way, and then feedback. So none of this is happening overnight. Last year, we also hosted a parent academy, and we had 75 parents join us to learn alongside of why we were making these changes and what the standards-based mindset was all about.
They read a book, right?
Yes, we did the Tom Schimmer Grading from the Inside Out, and he is also an educator who went through the change of really thinking about assessment practices. And his whole deal on grading is that grades should give kids good feedback and that it should inform their next steps in their learning process. And so that really was an anchor because he talked to us as educators since he was also an educator.
So what is new for this particular school year?
Well, we have two grading categories now. One is called Progress Check for Learning, and one is Assessment of Learning. And the progress checks are those quick formative assessments that give kids feedback along the way leading up to the bigger assessment or the one that is more at the targeted standard. To think about this like a sports analogy, we go to practice and we're practicing for a game. And so the practice is important and we want feedback along the way in those practice, and then we get ready for those assessments of learning. In addition to that, each of the assignments are weighted equally since we're getting away from task types. So we used to say, oh, well, this should be a major grade because we're calling it a test, or this is a major grade because it's a project. This is a minor grade because it's just a quick check. We were giving the same standards different weights just based on what we were calling the assessment. So we're focusing now on just really good assessments around standards.
All right, I'd love to hear from Ms. Mosley. You've been with Frisco ISD for 18 years and taught physics for 17 of those years. You're currently the Liberty High School Science Instructional Coach, and I know you can provide perspective on the impact in the classroom. Now, as a campus leader, you know the importance of making sure everyone is on the same page when it comes to new initiatives. How are you prepared as an educator for this change?
I would say we've been on this journey at Liberty it's been years that we've really been having these conversations just kind of off to the side. One of my favorite things about Liberty is that we are given the freedom to try new things as long as we reflect on that. And so we've been having conversations about this for several years. And maybe 3 or so years ago as a campus, we read Grading from the Inside Out, the book by Tom Schimmer that Meridith mentioned a little while ago, and really just started having more structured, organized conversations about what a grade means and how we best communicate where students are. And from there, we kind of just looked for the early adopters, the people who were excited and ready to make those changes, who were willing to kind of dabble and share out what they were learning and what they were doing in their classes. So a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, one of our teams decided to jump in and get a little bit of an early start on these one grade book category, one weighted grade, and just having feedback for the others. And they had some really, really positive results, and that has really benefited our campus.
As a teacher, what have you seen as those benefits for these assessments and grading practices?
I have seen a huge mindset shift amongst teachers and students. I think a very positive shift. I see a lot less anxiety with my students because they realize that this is just a data point. We're just seeing where we are right now, and we're going to get feedback, and then we're not stuck with this grade. Like it's just a little something that's going to go in as ungraded, and we'll see where we are. We'll make some changes. We'll jump in. We'll do some more practice, and then we're going to check back later. And we try to go through that cycle a couple times before we assign a grade, before the grade is kind of finalized. So I feel like also students are really focusing on the growth because they are not stressing about the fact that I just took this, what we used to be a quiz that was a minor grade that they didn't do as well as they wanted to, but they were kind of stuck with that grade in a sense. It was weighted less, but it wasn't going to go anywhere. And the shift that we've made over the last couple of years, they realized like this is where I was on that day, and it helps them make a plan on what they need to do and not be so stressed about that initial feedback.
And what does it mean to have students focus on these skills or the standards rather than the actual assessment?
I think that I would say that students are really focusing more on understanding and trying to get good data and get good feedback and not get so stressed about, oh my gosh, I'm taking this test today and this is the end-all be-all of my grade in this course. So they're really, instead of it being stressing out about a big test next Thursday, they're looking at what do I need to do to understand this.
And what has been the biggest challenge?
I thought it was going to be communicating with parents. I honestly did. I expected when we made these changes that there would be a lot of confusion. I've been pretty pleasantly surprised at how at the beginning of each year, we communicate with our teachers and with the teams or with the students about why we're grading the way we are, what grades should look like, what things are going to look like when they look at grades in HACC. And it's actually been I've received a lot of positive feedback. The biggest challenge I think that we have faced is just trying to design our assessment plan so that we can quickly get feedback to our students and not feel like we're constantly formally assessing. So in the past, we're always informally assessing our students. We're always, walking around the classroom and asking them questions. And we, as teachers, have a pretty good pulse on how a student is doing. But we feel like if we're going to consider something as kind of an official data point, we want to make sure that it's really leveled. And so the biggest challenge for us has been finding the right rhythm of those assessments and making sure that those assessments are all leveled and that we're not moving the target on students, because we don't want students to, hey, you just learned this, let's try the easy questions. We want them to see, okay, hey, you just learned this. This is where you're going to need to be in the end, and this is where you are in relation to that. And you're maybe not there yet, but you know exactly where you need to be. And so kind of designing those assessments and that pacing of those assessments has been the biggest challenge for us.
What about the benefits? What benefits have you seen for students or families?
I would say, and I think I mentioned this earlier, one of the biggest benefits has just been, I think in general, students are less stressed. School is stressful, there's no doubt about that, but I think I've seen some improvement as far as how stressed students are about grades, because they really understand, or are starting to understand, that this is just feedback for you to know how you're doing, feedback for my teacher to know what next steps that they need to take. I also think it's brought back some time for a lot of our students, because we used to have students who would come and take every retest that we offered them, and they were taking sometimes multiple retests a week, coming in early, staying late to take all these retests. And the incorporation that we've done of getting all of these assessments into a natural assessment cycle, all occurring within class, I think has really given back our students a lot of time.
Sounds like that would have been stressful.
It was.
And what advice would you give to educators who are working through these practices?
The first thing that I would say to teachers and other educators who are trying to work through this is really think about what you want to communicate to your students. Do you want them to know where they are? Not all of our courses end in some big summative state or standardized assessment, but in the end, you want your students to know, am I on track to master the skills and the standards that I need to for this course or not? And that's ultimately recognizing that that's what you want a grade to communicate kind of is the first step in this mind shift. I would also say, if you haven't read Grading from the Inside Out by Tom Schimmer, read that book. He's got some really great practical ideas as well. The other thing that I would do is I would say talk to your students about what grades mean to them. When we started kind of having some of these conversations, I pulled in a group of students who just happened to be hanging out in my classroom during advisory, and I gave them some cards with some descriptors that said like mastered or proficient or beginning, and then like letter grades, A, B, C, D, and then number grades on a 0 to 100. And I asked them, I was like, just what do these mean to you? Like what word matches what number? And kind of let them, and I just watched them and listened to them. And it was really eye-opening to see what they thought about the meaning of a grade.
Aadi, your perspective as a student is really valuable, especially as a senior who has been with FISD for 13 years. I know you're in AP classes, you take engineering at the CTEC, and take classes through Collin College. So it's clear you're taking advantage of the wide array of opportunities in Frisco ISD while continuing to follow your academic passions. So, how have the assessments and grading practices impacted you as a student?
So I find that the new grading practices that we have here have actually made it a lot easier for me to actually understand what we're being taught in more detail. So like back then in our old like major minor system, I think we also had it in middle school, but it felt more like the assessments just focused on how well you knew something. You just accepted that something was just the way it was, just so you could do well on the assessments. You didn't have enough time to actually learn why something worked. And I think this was the case in my Physics 1 class, because like I was interested in understanding why like certain things just worked the way they did. But with all the quizzes and tests just racking up, I didn't really have time. I just had to accept, okay, this formula does this, and this is when I should use it. And if I did take the time to try and figure out why, then the quiz just would come by, and since I don't actually know how to use it, I just get a basically irreversible grade for the most part. But with the new grading system, I feel like I can actually learn why something works the way it does, and that's actually what I've like seen in Miss Mosley's class. I've actually learned why something worked, and it helped me to take the time to actually genuinely master the content that we were being taught in better detail.
And how have your assessments changed as a student? What have you seen?
So before, with that old major minor system, basically the only test that mattered to me was the test. And that's because it was the only assignment that was actually capable of waterfalling anything. So it really incentivized me to be perfect when taking the test. And that made it pretty stressful because I used to like spend hours per test just trying to make sure I got it perfectly down, which took away time that I could have used for extracurriculars or just my own enjoyment overall. So with this new grading system, the assessments are actually tailored per topic. So I could have like 3 assessments that were dedicated to just, let's say, just dimensional analysis. And each one could actually test my knowledge in the subject in more detail. Like Ms. Mosley said before, that initial assessment doesn't like just baby step you through like, I don't know, how many feet are in a mile. It just takes you all the way to where you're supposed to be. So right away, I already know what I have to do to work towards it. And all I have to do is in each subsequent assessment is just show that I'm actually getting better, being able to solve those problems and apply it. And I actually felt like I'm learning that way. And I didn't have to worry about any waterfalling or anything because as long as I showed growth, I just knew my grade would show what I actually knew.
That's great. Now, I know you also have a younger brother that you strive to be a role model for. What advice do you have for parents or students struggling with the new grading system?
So my advice would be not to put as much pressure on getting the best grade right away because, again, this new grading system just strives for a growth in learning. And that's why these assessments should be thought more as like progress checks than grades instead. So if you mess up on the first few assessments, don't worry about it. Instead of beating yourself up over it, just take the time to truly understand where you went wrong and how to correct it. Because if you do, you'll definitely see improvement in both your grade and understanding in the curriculum.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, everybody.
Here's a look at news from around the district. The district has adopted a new vision statement, empowering students to pursue their passion and purpose, chosen by staff in a recent vote. This change aligns with the FISD's Future for Ready framework and emphasizes preparing students for self-determined success while retaining our mission to know every student by name and need. 111 Frisco ISD students have been named National Merit semifinalists as a result of their scores on the PSAT. Frisco ISD has the highest number of 2024 National Merit semifinalists of any district in the entire state of Texas.